Worship this morning. That was great. It just encouraged me, and I hope it did to you and encourages you to actually, your faith was encouraged as you sang those songs. A few weeks ago, you had Kevin Miller here teaching about discipleship. He was actually teaching on the Great Commission. And before I go on to teach about discipleship, and as you already heard this morning, I'm very concerned that pastors care about discipleship and leadership training. And COVID, if COVID has taught us anything, COVID has taught the church that we desperately need to get back to the basics of discipling people. I have the chance of speaking with people, pastors in Spain and Colombia, here in Canada, and it's interesting, we've all, no matter where you are in the world, some things are actually common of what we've been learning about COVID. And that is that most Christians have been way too dependent on Sunday morning. Almost everywhere, we're finding that people don't have the capacity to feed themselves from Monday to Saturday. And they depend on this dose that we give them on Sunday morning. And I do not pretend to give you a dose that'll actually last you for the whole week. I'm just giving you a piece that if you actually meditate on it all through the week, it might do some good. And so, as I've been working with Fellowship Prairies and Fellowship International, it's been very revealing to just see what God is doing in different countries. In Colombia, for instance, we have not had to face some of the challenges here in Canada that COVID has provided in other places. One of our churches, that's a larger church, 500 to 600 people, they had 70 families lose their jobs this year. 70 families. And the church and the government wasn't going to keep those 70 families going. The church had to keep those 70 families going. And we don't have those type of challenges often here in Canada because the government has bailed us out in so many ways. But when you have 70 families, that's about a third of your people need to be supported by the other 2/3. And it's been encouraging to see how the church in Colombia has actually stepped up and cared for those in need. Of course, because people are so used to having Sunday morning services, actually more than one of our churches, a few of our churches have decided to actually put a daily devotional online for their people at 5:30 in the morning before they go to work. Get up at 5:30, and the majority of them get up at 5:30, and they're together in a devotional each morning. I love that type of commitment, that they've actually done something because they've realized how needy the people are. Also, one of the great things I've been involved with the last few months is that because of COVID, our churches in Colombia have realized that all independent churches, pastors who have no support systems, need some help. And so they've decided to open up a monthly meeting with independent pastors just to encourage them, help them, and they're from many denominations. And I'm excited. I actually get to be a part of that every month. So every month I get online and I get to be one of the facilitators of helping these pastors who are from all kinds of churches. And our Redil churches in Colombia are actually providing this help for them. But probably most of my Zoom meetings have been about the soul care of the pastor himself. Pastors have found this time very difficult, very tiring, very exhausting, and of course, most pastors don't know how to measure what's going on. It's so hard to measure really what's going on. And so most of my Zoom calls that I have with people in Spain or in Colombia or even here in Canada have been about helping pastors just care about their own well-being, because they're the ones who are finding it very difficult just to keep going and know what to do and how to measure their own lives and how to measure their own ministries. So that's some of the things that I've been involved in. I never dreamt I would be involved in one other thing. Last year when I went away for a sabbatical, I thought I knew what I was going to be doing this year. And when I came back, as you know, COVID was here. And then the regional director, who you know is Mark Breitkreitz, had cancer. He's been at home since last July. Thank goodness the treatments have gone very well for him. So he's right now waiting for another treatment to do with his immune system. And he will start those treatments here in June, I believe. Please pray for him. But because he had that situation, of course, Rod, who you know, Rod Black and myself, had more to do with the Fellowship Prairies. And then my home church has fallen apart last year. Not because of COVID, because of other issues. And so when we came back from England last year, we found our home church actually devastated. We used to have around 200 people come to church. We probably have lost 60% of our people at Calvary Baptist. And we have no staff. And so 5 of us, lay people, me included, have been chosen to run the church this year. So a lot of my time is actually caring for Calvary Baptist Church, one of your sister churches. And I would love you to be praying for Calvary these days. And it's been exciting. We are encouraged. It gives us an opportunity to lay a new foundation. And guess what? It's going to be a foundation on discipleship. And so we're excited about what we can do as things open up. Now let's get back to the sermon this morning. And as I said, I'm going to talk about discipleship. But where does discipleship actually begin? We think that discipleship starts at church. Actually, it starts in our homes. Discipleship, our home, is the first place discipleship should be happening. And so this morning, I'm going to be talking about that. Now, please don't get so upset about all the things that God's asking you to do, because it's not so much about what He's asking you to do as much as getting your heart right so that you'll do the things He's asking you to do. And so at Calvary, we've been going through a series called Come Follow Me on Sundays, streaming as well. And this morning, I want to talk to you about how Jesus invites us into a life of integrity. Jesus invites us into a life of integrity. Now, I've mentioned this man's name before, or this book called The Christian Atheist. So many of us don't realize how many aspects of our life are not really integrated to our faith. For instance, we often say, Jesus is with me all the time. But I actually pray to Him so little through the day as if He didn't exist or He wasn't with me. They say that most Christians pray 2 minutes a day. 2 minutes a day. That's crazy. If we really believe that He's with us all the time, it would be a constant communication with Him. Or for instance, in my own life, I say I trust God immensely. Then why am I always full of anxiety? If I really trust God, it has to affect other aspects of my life. So what are we talking about when we say Jesus invites us into a life of integrity? It's when faith and values are integrated, when my soul, mind, heart, strength are in tune, not misfiring. For you men who love mechanics, you know what it's like when a car constantly is misfiring. It's almost as if the pistons are fighting each other. God doesn't want our life to be misfiring or disintegrated. And it's so common today to have dualism in our form of life. We believe one thing, but we don't think it affects how I use my body, for instance. God wants us to actually live an integrated life. Truly authentic people demonstrate integrated lives. I remember a few years ago, my second son came to me and he said this, "Dad, are you for real?" What a crazy question. Dad, are you for real? What was he trying to actually get from me? What was he asking? What he was saying is, Dad, am I going to find out somewhere down the road that you have some secret lifestyle that has nothing to do with what you preach? He wanted to make sure that what I preach is actually what I live. Skye Jethani, in his book called With, he mentions these types of disciples. You're going to see this slide that talks about what type of disciple do we want to reproduce. And he talks about 5 types of disciples. He says, first of all, there's those disciples who live life over God. Who are the ones who live life over God? And he explains in his book, he says, those are the guys who think that God has left us some prescribed rules to live by, but then he's in heaven and he's actually not moment by moment involved in your life. He just left you some principles and you're supposed to live by them so that you can control what happens. That's life over God. Then he explains life under God are those people who have a contractual type of Christianity where they think if I obey God, God is obligated to do certain things for me. So it's a contract. I'll do these things, God, and you have to do these other things. That's life under God, he says. Then he says life for God. And I understand this one really well. Life for God means that everything is about serving God. Now, there's a problem with that. And I've lived that one for many years. Life is just about serving. If it's true, I will quickly run out of gas. I will quickly become very weak because I have to be receiving from God in order to be able to serve him with joy. But so many of us think that it's our productivity that God wants from us, and we measure life according to productivity. And that's those life for God. And then he says life from God. Those are the consumerists. Christianity is all about receiving from God all the gifts he wants to give us, but it's not about loving God himself. It's just all the other extras that he gives us that matter in life. And then finally he says, but I think what we need, yes, each one of those other ones have some truth to them. But he says what we should be living the Christian life about is being with God. And John 15, of course, we all know John 15, or most of us remember what John 15 says. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, then ask what you will, and it'll be done unto you. But the whole issue is about abiding in Christ. And Skye says our life should be much more about being with God than any of the other styles of disciple. I've said that integrity. What is integrity? The integration of soul, mind, heart, and body. That means my passions, my intellect. Yes, Christians do not chuck their minds into the garbage when they come into Christianity. Your mind is totally engaged, but also your body, your strength, your efforts. I love how Nicky Gumbel explains the integrated life. He says this, holiness is about living an integrated life rather than a disintegrated one. Holiness is where there is no difference between our public, private, and secret lives, and no difference between what we profess and what we practice. Holiness is linked to wholeness. When God calls you to be holy, he is saying, be wholly mine. We're going to look at that a bit more later. Be wholly mine. I've written this definition of disciple, and it's a lengthy definition, sorry. You could actually get rid of the middle phrase in this definition, and it would make sense, but listen to this definition. A disciple is a 24/7 follower of and learner of Jesus, who loves being with him and is being set free of what hinders him or her from being with and being like Jesus, and then helps others do the same through loving relationships. A disciple is a 24/7 24/7 follower of Jesus. You know, you would think it would be preponderous. You'd think I was crazy if I said to you this morning, I'm married to my wife 7 hours a day. Or if I said to you, I'm married to my wife 2 days a week. That would be crazy. Well, it's the exact same with Jesus. It's crazy to say, I'm a follower of Jesus for 2 hours a week. Or whatever you want to call it, even if it's 2 or 3 days. No, a follower of Jesus 24/7. Now let's go to some scripture and see what Jesus says about this. Mark 12, I'm going to begin in the New Testament, but we're actually going to go to the Old Testament in a minute. Mark 12 says this. Some Pharisees actually came to him and said, Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. Interesting. They knew that Jesus was a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? And look at what Jesus says. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy, the opposite of integrity. Now, in this passage, just right there, we know Jesus was defined not by the people around him, by what people thought about. He was defined by, it says here, the truth. But also he was defined by his Father completely. And then it goes on to say a little further in Mark 12 this. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating, what we just read. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Most people think that this commandment started in the New Testament. They think this is new. The Jews actually knew that this wasn't new. This is actually, he's just repeating something from the Old Testament. And let me take you there. Let's go to Deuteronomy 6, 4-9, and it's going to come up on the screen. This is what it says. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Jesus was repeating exactly these words. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. Now, it's interesting that this commandment is given in the following context. When I started this morning, I said, we're going to look at that discipleship starts at home. And look at what he says. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live. Now that verse 2, okay, it's not after verse 10. That verse 2 is actually at the beginning of the chapter saying this is why you're going to do all this. So that they will fear me and your children's children will fear me. Wow. So discipleship starts in our homes. You know what? And I'm going to tell you about the inconsistencies of my own discipleship. I actually asked 2 of my kids to tell me what they thought about this passage while I was preparing this. I wanted to know what they thought about how we had done our job. That's not a safe thing to do. You just let your adult children tell you. They know exactly what you didn't do and what you did do. But the other reason I actually asked them to read this passage is so that they too would ask themselves, how are we doing? So I need to actually, probably I should let my kids do more of my sermon prep in the future. Because you're going to get the benefit of what they were telling me. See, before we take this discipleship or our relationship to the office and onto the golf course or the playground of our lives. It has to start at home. And probably my boys, my two boys especially, probably have seen the most inconsistencies with my faith on the playground. Not at church. No, probably on the playground. Dad, why did you get so upset playing that game the other day? And like many millennialists, my son was happy to show me my inconsistencies. He said this to me. He said, Dad, you say you love God? Well, let me tell you, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Why don't you care about global warming? Why don't you care about how you're treating the world? Oh my goodness. I told you, just ask your kids, they'll tell you. My daughter said the following. She said, you know what, you taught us a lot about God's presence in the extraordinary moments. And we know that God did extraordinary things, but yet he actually didn't show us often how God was actually in the ordinary moments. And then she gave me an example. She said, it's like my son, my grandson, who's almost 7. A few months ago, they were making something at home, and they had put yeast into this bread, and all of a sudden they saw this thing all growing and growing, and the little kid says, that's amazing, that's a miracle, God, how God made that stuff. She said, that's what it's about, just God's in the ordinary too. You see, discipleship is actually happening if you like it or not. You are discipling your children if you like it or not. Now, if you're not a parent watching online this morning, don't shut off your TV. There's something here for you as well. You see, we're all discipling our kids if we like it or not. We'll see the results. I tell you, we will. We do see the results. Now, before you start feeling guilty about the things you're not doing, I want to talk about the implicit message that's in this passage. So, first of all, I want to read verse 4 again. It says this, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. As you can see, I put a title to this, Relationship. The rest is a result of the type of relationship you have with God. Now, let's be honest, and the New Testament tells us as well, you and I can't love God if we first haven't figured out how much he loves us. It's impossible. So our first job is to actually learn how to receive his love and show our kids how to receive that love from him. Because when God calls you to be holy, like Nicky Gumbel said, he's saying, be wholly mine. Be mine. Now, how do we get to that? I respond to him over any other authority. But do I realize the incredible benefit of actually submitting my life to him? There's incredible benefits to it. And our children actually have to hear why it's incredible to submit our wills to this God. When God says love God and then love others as you love yourselves, or he's actually saying this is a response to if you actually believe I love you. We cannot love without first receiving his love. It is only in trust and conviction of his love and goodwill for me that I can respond. And guess what? Our children and those who are following us, even if you don't have children, someone's following you. I guarantee you, if it's at work or where, if you're a Christian, somebody is watching you and you're influencing other people, like it or not. And this is the very first question your children and those who are following us are going to ask. Is God good? Is God good? That's the basic question they're going to ask. Now, let's ask this question. Because a lot of people say, Christianity isn't about our emotions. Have you ever been in love with someone and it didn't affect your emotions? That would be stupid to talk like that. Oh, yeah, I love so-and-so, but my emotions aren't engaged. When you love God, your emotions are engaged as well. It's impossible not to. And when you're in love, you freely give yourself to that person. You spend so much time. If you have any children that are older, from 15 years old and up, you've noticed that you say, "What?" You almost tear your hair out. That's where mine all went. You see your kids and say, "Please don't give all your energy to that person. It's not worth it." See, if there's relationship, there'll be the next thing, response. Look at what the response is. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. What's he saying here? You know what? The real me lives at home. The real you lives at home. If you want to know someone, go and spend a month with them, and you'll know who they really are. The real me lives at home. And that's why these commands first have to be lived out there. It says, put them on your hearts. Talk about them. When? At all times. My second son said this, I believe we're actually fulfilling this commandment, but I realize that I don't talk about it enough with my child. When he studied this passage. It says symbols on your hands. That means as you go to work, you have this concept, do all to the glory of God. You're going to be one of the best workers wherever you go. Then it says, bind them on your foreheads. That means your mind. You can have them on your mind. Then he says door frames in the gate. What I think about that is that when you leave your house and you leave, and on the gate is a reminder, remember, even when you're away from home, these are the truths that are going to actually be part of your life. So when you go to work, and if this one I would love to have said to my kids, and I'm sure you have, if you're a parent with older kids, you've said, house rules are not just house rules. I hope you leave these same rules away from homes. You see, our conversation reveals what we love and what is part of our life. And in Canada, I think one of the greatest enemies of our soul is silence. I don't know why. There's all kinds of reasons why. There's silence. We haven't talked about these things as we go about our lives. Do I only speak about God when I disciplined my children? That's one of the things that came up. You see, often when we discipline our children, we talk about why we're doing it and because God's in it. And my daughter says, that's not the only time we should talk about God. You see, when they hear us talking about God, that impresses on them that God is present all the time. Have I let my children know that I am aware that He is always with me? Now, at Calvary, there's a few people. There's a couple people who are in love right now. The crazy thing is we all know. Why do we know? They can't keep quiet. If we love this God, sooner or later, people will know about it. So I've said it's relationship first, then there's a response. But look at what my daughter said the following. She said, Jesus is the perfect disciple. He actually lived this out. The way he walked and talked, and as he went, wherever he went, this was on his lips. And this is what he was doing. And I said, that's fabulous, Julie. Incredible. How did Jesus live this integrated life? Or as a disciple, an integrated disciple? Let me just tell you a few. Questions. How did he show his love for his Father all the time? How did he show that he loved his neighbor as himself? How did he integrate daily life with expression of love? And my daughter said, you know what? His parables, almost all his parables, are about the things, just the natural things that people were seeing right then while they were walking. About the fig tree, about the grain in the field, it was always daily life stuff. It wasn't some extraordinary moment. He was talking about the things that were in his life and what everybody else was seeing. As he walked with his disciples, he used analogies of what was around them. The day-to-day events were his theater in which he acted out his natural self. So, here's the last thing. How integrated should this relationship be? It said, when I rise, when I go about my daily business, as I go to work, as I play golf, and as I go to bed. All throughout the day, it was just natural. I have to ask myself, what areas of my life are not being affected by the relationship I have with God? See, my kids would have said, Dad, you should have taken God onto the football field. What were they saying? That relationship should have been affecting you how you played golf too, how you played football, how you played soccer. Right on. They're right on. What's the result? And in this passage, this actually surprised me. The result is this: so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live. And we all know, Solomon said, the beginning of all wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Now, most kids, what does this mean? And honestly, I'm so thankful that my parents taught me the fear of the Lord. It is not about being afraid of God. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says this, he says that in the Hebrew, the real meaning of this is radical amazement. Radical amazement of God. But there's two other factors about the fear of God. Awareness of his presence. Always being aware of his presence. You know, if I was always aware of his presence, it would affect how I live. It would affect how I act. If I knew Jesus was with me, and he is, but if I actually lived that way, it would affect how I treat guys on the whatever sports field I'm on. It would affect how I look at my computer. Because he's always there. But the third is, I have a respect of his rightful place in my life. About a month ago, my neighbor, we help our neighbors because the wife has been ill ever since the kids were born 4 years ago. She broke her back in about 9 places. So we've helped these kids almost weekly. And about a month ago, my neighbors could not stop one of the children from screaming. She was hysterical, and she would not stop screaming. So they called Dean to come over, my wife, and said, would you please come over? So Dean went over, and here's this little girl, 3.5 years old, almost 4, screaming and would not stop. And they had no idea what was going on. And my wife said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to pray for her? And they said, yeah, that's why we asked you to come. My wife sat with the little girl for just a little while and started praying for her. And then as she prayed, this little girl started to stop screaming hysterically. And then my wife explained to them, do you believe that Jesus is here and that you can actually pray to Jesus as well? And the husband, the father, who isn't a believer, he says, listen up, girl, listen up. Yes, that's true. My wife at that moment was teaching them what it means to fear the Lord. Jesus is present, and it makes a difference. and when you invoke Jesus to be with you, and actually he can actually make a difference in what's happening. It was a beautiful moment to actually witness, my wife witnessed how this actually comes about in a home. Now, guess what? In the same passage of Deuteronomy 6, and we're almost finished, it says, in the future, look at what it says, verse 20. In the future, your children will ask you, what's this thing about all these commandments, all these laws, decrees, regulations that the Lord our God has commanded us to obey? Now, if you have any kids in your house, at some point they're going to ask the exact same question. What are all these rules about anyway? They're stupid. Why do we have to have them? Your children have never asked that? I'm glad these children have never asked that. At some point, your children will ask you this same question. What's the meaning of all these laws? And look at what that's what surprises me. In this passage is how they are supposed to respond. This is how you're supposed to respond. Children, God took the initiative when we were in Egypt. It wasn't our deal. It wasn't even our idea. God took the initiative. And then it says, God rescued us and freed us from slavery. Now, today, every Christian knows that they were a slave to sin. Our children need to understand how free we are compared to before and what this means. And he says, God rescued us and freed us from slavery. And it says, we are happy to live under new management. Our children need to see that this is not a burden. This is a joy to be under new management, because the guy that used to manage our lives was horrible. He only liked to kill, destroy, and lie to us and take everything from us possible. 1 John 5:3 says, in fact, this is the love for God, to keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Wow. This is what we're supposed to tell our children. This next slide is what my son said. He said, Dad, this is what happens. I'm freer when I decenter self and center Christ. That came out of his lips when he said, that's what this passage is about. I'm freer when I decenter self and center Christ. See, disciples are reproduced in the classroom of life, lived alongside of others. And we all have that happening in our lives. Even if you don't have children, you're living alongside of others. And he's asking you to be a disciple on the way. Sooner or later, people will know that you love God this much. 3 questions to leave with you this morning. What perception of God needs to change so that I can live an integrated lifestyle? Something about your relationship with God needs to change in order for this to become more of a reality. It's not about working harder at this. No, it's about changing something about your relationship with God so that the rest happens. What would need to change in my lifestyle for it to be integrated? What do I want my children or others to appreciate about the Jesus I'm representing? And I thought about this, and I would like you as parents this week to actually answer this question very clearly. What is it that you'd like your children to remember about your Christianity? And I want to tell you one of my almost immediate first and foremost, that they can see that I'm secure in how much God loves me, which gets translated in how much I love him, and that it's actually a joy to be under his management. It's a joy to allow him be Lord of my life. That's what I think I would want them to understand. We're going to worship with one more song this morning. But as we do, I just encourage you, ask yourself, what type of disciple are we? Are we a 24/7 disciple? Or are we only married 7 hours a day? Or are we only married one day a week? No, this is a relationship that's 24/7.